Today marks International Women's Day, an occasion dedicated to celebrating the achievements of women and to sound the call for more action towards equality. UN Chief Antonio Guterres warns global progress on women's rights is vanishing. He said the goal of gender equality could take another 3 centuries before it's achieved. A glass ceiling index by The Economist measures the influence of women in the workforce, and the results a screenshot of conditions across the OECD club of mostly rich countries. Ranked as some of the best places in the world for working women are several Nordic countries, like Iceland and Sweden. On the flip side, though, we have Japan and South Korea sitting right at the bottom of the index. The report notes women in both countries are still largely forced to choose between family or their careers. And worldwide, this gender gap in labour force participation persists. Figures from the International Labour Organization reveal a much higher unemployment rate among women than among men. It's a trend, some say, made worse by the pandemic. At this rate, the World Economic Forum reports it will take more than 130 years before full gender parity is achieved. And while the global gender gap has been closed by around 68% to date, with large strides measured in the areas of education and health, the same cannot be said when it comes to economic participation or, for that matter, political empowerment. For more, Saadia Zahidi, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum, joins us live from Geneva. Ms. Zahidi, before we get to the implications or the reading we can take from this figure, 68.1%, I'd like to ask you how it's actually derived. From my reading, it's 146 countries, 4 dimensions, you get the average of 68.1%. And from this figure, we then project we need 132 years to bridge the gender gap. Have I got that quite right?
It's exactly that. So we look at those 4 areas: economic participation, education, health, political empowerment, and we look at about 14 different indicators across those 4 areas. We combine them together and we look at them roughly on a 0 to 100 scale, 0 being inequality or perfect inequality, with 100 being complete parity. That's what we look at. And when you look at it in that manner, 68.1% is about as far as how the world has gotten, the 146 countries that we're covering. And if we continue at the same trajectory that we've had for the last 16 years that we've been measuring the gender gap, it will take us globally 132 years to get to parity.
All right, but if we break down those dimensions, as an example, across the 146 countries, in terms of health and survival, it's 95.8% of the gap bridged. But political empowerment, you've got 22%, so a very large gap there. Now, if you have limited resources, and resources are always limited, and limited political will, you want to put money into bridging this gap across all these countries, across all these dimensions. Where would you put your money?
So I think most countries have already made a big investment in developing the human capital by investing in health, by investing in education. There's obviously exceptions around the world, but those 2 areas, many countries have made strides. Where they need to focus next is actually bringing women into the labor force. And that requires a few different aspects. One, it requires building out a care economy, because otherwise the care burden tends to fall on women. Second, it requires a strategic focus on workforce planning. If we know that the growing roles, high-paid, high-skilled roles of the future, for example, relate to science, technology, engineering, and math, we need to get more women and more girls into those subject matters and into those talent pipelines. And third, we need to ensure that businesses, small and large, SMEs, as well as some of the largest corporations in the world, are actually removing barriers to women in the workplace and ensuring that when it comes to hiring, promotion, retention, there is equal focus on ensuring that women are making it into leadership positions, not just 50% at entry, but 50% all the way to the top at leadership. That's where a lot of focus could be going today.
Well, what you point out, it makes perfectly good sense. I think any reasonable person would agree with that. Any leader who wants to make use of half its population would agree with that. But clearly, there's relatively little political will or business will to carry out these obvious initiatives. In your job, what is difficult, convincing people or getting them to do more than being convinced?
This is where the politics point comes in. To your point, we are very far away from parity when it comes to politics. In fact, if the current trend continues, it will take 155 years to get to political parity. And this is less about financial investment. It's more about ensuring that women are a much stronger part of political representation. And if that happens, if there's a more balanced viewpoint of what is needed, then you will start getting those investments in the care economy. You will start getting more strategic focus on workforce planning. You will start getting better decisions all around in terms of education, in terms of health. You will start getting more better decision making when it comes to, for example, women in leadership positions or women in boards. So I think there does also need to be a focus on getting more women into political leadership. But the second element is this is an obvious economic case for any country that wants to recover from everything that has happened over the last 2 or 3 years. For countries that want the best ideas and best innovations on the table so that we can move forward, grow again, recover, grow faster and in a more inclusive way. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to get all the ideas on the table. And so accelerating women's participation in leadership roles, it's what's likely to get to creative and dynamic economies in the future. So whether men or women are in political leadership positions, for any political leader, this should be one of the best investments they can make.
Thanks for joining us, Saadia Zahidi, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum.